Hello, I'm Art Francisco.
And I'm Andrew G.
And this is the Marxist line. Week 69. To learn more about the Marxist line, please check out the Reddit page below at Marxist_USCA.
And today we'll be covering, under current events, we'll be talking about the mass demonstrations in Colombia and the bombings of Gaza and what's going on there.
Yeah, and then we'll also talk about the Bull EA's statement on Hong Kong and their take on Hong Kong and China.
All right, so our first one's from, we've got a report from Oakland Socialist. I guess he's got a guy, he's just John in contact with this Anthony.
John Ryman. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's just reporting live from what's going on in Colombia.
Right.
So, so how long has this been going on for now, Art?
It's been going on for about a month now, as I understand it. I think it began late last month, in late April. Well, I guess less than a month, and it's been going on since late April. And as I understand it, what happened was there was basically a rollout of like a tax package rollout, which was basically austerity measures.
Yeah.
And then it snowballed, as far as like how many people got pissed off about it.
Yeah.
And from there, it rolled into a general strike.
Yeah. So just before we go on, have you looked into any of the Marxist communities or parties or websites originating in Colombia, or is this have we just got reporting from
I haven't. Right now, we only have reporting from like John Ryman and IMT. I haven't really seen a lot of reporting from anybody in Colombia. I mean, as you know, a lot of the so-called tankies within the community have basically banned me from almost everything.
Yeah.
Which makes it very difficult to get in touch with other members of the Marxist community, like in Colombia and such.
Yeah.
And it's not just me. They ban pretty much everybody they disagree with.
Yeah.
But this, what they're effectively doing is they're keeping Marxists from talking to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I see more freedom of speech in right-wing groups than I do in Marxist groups these days.
Right. A lot of people within the Marxist community do not value freedom of speech. Like, let's be honest.
I mean, I agree with with what you and what's his name? Jeez, I can't remember. No, Ben. Yeah, Ben said about keeping the noise down, but I mean, there's a difference between the noise ratio and then just open discussion with just because you don't exactly 100% agree on their line, they kick you off.
Yeah,
it's not a good place to be.
Yeah, it's terrible practice, and it's in my opinion, it's basically not only sectarian, but it just weakens it weakens like revolutionary leadership. It weakens
of course,
the working class.
I mean, it's a big stumbling block for people even just automatically shutting out any Marxist ideas because they tie it to authoritarianism and statism and restriction of freedom of speech and stuff and such.
Right.
So, yeah, it's definitely
and the
not helping.
Trotskyists are guilty of it just as much as the people that they call MLs.
Yeah.
Like, so, yeah, I mean, it's across the board. It's a big problem. It's part of why I think the show is very important.
Yeah.
But anyway,
so I mean, I was leading to kind of a question here. I was like, so it seems like in Colombia that there is quite a mass movement, and I'm just wondering, besides from this reporting, like where are the Marxist leadership in all of this, and what they have to say down in Colombia?
There are a lot of people.
I was gonna look at that, but then maybe we can update this next weekend and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a lot of people within the Marxist community in Colombia, like historically, like Central and South America. There's a lot of people who consider themselves to be Marxists, and they consider that their organizations are Marxist, whether they're Trotskyist or ML but I think I think that the militancy of the strike is probably an indication that I was thinking about this, and I was like, well, if I was in Colombia, I mean, I'd definitely be participating in these protests and urging them to become more militant, to continue striking.
Okay, so when you talk about militant, I just want to bring up this what is it called? Encapuchados. I guess we would call them agent provocateurs, or even black.
So these are troublemakers, basically.
What's that?
These are troublemakers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
this is something the Marxist community should be speaking out against.
Yeah, I think it's important to expose the troublemakers. I mean, there's troublemakers in every movement.
Yeah.
Like all around the world, there's always like there's like in Seattle, we have the window breakers, and some are anarchists, and some are are young people. But there's always basically that's just talking about the troublemakers, and it said that some are linked to ELN and FARC, and I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah,
could be. It could be. And it says that some have been throwing rocks and potato bombs, and maybe that's true. In my opinion, the troublemakers are not a sufficient reason to dismiss the movement. It doesn't delegitimize it. And it's important to make the distinction between the troublemakers and the rest of the movement. I mean, I understand that it probably hurts public perception a little bit, but for people in the Marxist community, I don't think it's important to harp too much on the troublemakers. Yeah, the troublemakers are annoying and they frustrate the movement, but they represent a fairly small section. I don't think we should be encouraging troublemaking.
No, yeah.
But these instances of troublemaking, let's say a factory owner gets kidnapped because he treated his workers like total dog shit, right?
Yeah.
And he gets kidnapped by the workers. And they give him demands. Now, will that be troublemaking? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
so I'm just wondering, like, because I'm trying to remember, because when there was the Occupy movement, there were people like Chris Hedges that spoke out against like this anarchist black bloc.
Right.
And such. So, I mean, do you view this as like the same kind of position?
Yeah,
These
I mean,
troublemakers as the.
I mean, I don't think of it as like a cancer.
Yeah.
It's I think it's more complicated than say Chris Hedges would probably make it out to be.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's like I said, some of these troublemakers sincerely support the movement probably, and I'm sure that some are criminals and opportunists. They just want to loot, and I'm sure others are agent provocateurs. And so I think it's more complicated than you know, all of them are bad guys or all of them are good guys, you know.
Sure. Yeah. I just want to make a clarification for, because there's this, misconception that, Marxists and their idea of private property is that all of us believe that everything should be smashed and that's acceptable, or that, it's a little more, like you said, it's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the troublemaking tactics, of like throwing rocks and stuff. I mean, it depends. I think it would probably depend on the circumstances, but
totally. Yeah. I mean, exactly. I mean, different countries are different levels of class division than
right. But but I mean, as I see it, like there is like a question of like, oh well, do we support a diversity of tactics or not?
Yeah.
And that was raised in Occupy, or, regarding the troublemakers. So like, do we support everybody basically doing their own thing? And I don't think that I couldn't support that that argument.
Yeah.
Today, okay. Because there needs to be discipline in a movement,
Yeah.
And there needs to be some unity of discipline, and if there's like, and I think that, in my opinion, if there's going to be violence, it needs to be an organized form of violence, that's well thought out. And it doesn't need to be just like, I'm going to pick up some rocks and start chucking them with no regard to how that's going to affect the rest of the movement.
So going back, okay, so do you think these concessions that Duque, do you think he's really in trouble? I mean, how far, or maybe it's the next one that says that there's, the IMT.
We could talk about both of them because it's the same conversation. So.
Yeah, so the IMT says that this is quite a substantial victory, and that, with these concessions. And I mean, what do you think of the state of the movement here? Do you think there's, considering the strong Marxist history in Latin America, do you think there's a real chance here for this, for the so-called leftist Marxists to step it up here and really push forward, or do you think this is still, kind of loosely unorganized, more like Occupy Wall Street or whatever? Do you see this as having more revolutionary potential?
As far as I see it, this is basically like a massive anti-austerity pushback, and it's the pushback is backed by the trade unions, but as far as like potential and all that goes, I would, unfortunately, I haven't seen what like other people like in the Marxist community and in the left who seem to be of influence in Colombia are saying on the ground. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem that Oakland Socialist or IMT, for that matter, recognize that it's important to understand that. So like, and that's most Marxist, groups within the Marxist community, they don't seem to understand that it's important to listen to other groups within the Marxist community and try to understand what they're doing. Those who basically want to be the leadership, want to be, are willing to put themselves out as like a revolutionary leadership, and it's important to analyze that. I don't see that here, and because they don't think it's very important, it's difficult for me to see like what their mistakes are and what their strengths are, and to provide a deeper take on what they should do, like, as far as the direction they should take. The people that are in Colombia, in my opinion, understand Colombian politics better than everybody. So it's,
I mean, they've got their slogan is "El paro no para," the strike doesn't stop. So it seems to be a little bit more revolutionary and militant than the potential
right,
that happened during Occupy in America.
And there's a lot going on over there, like like Colombia is like literally right next to Venezuela. So Venezuelan politics, like, you'd be foolish to say Venezuelan politics hasn't affected Colombia,
Sure,
or Venezuela hasn't affected the Colombian left, and the other thing is there's been like a 50-year drug war with the cartels.
That's also been along the Venezuelan-Colombia border too. So
as well as like all kinds of CIA programs and crap like that. And as far as the movement goes, I mean, my gut feeling is that you have a movement and you have a capitalist regime that wants to promote austerity. What's going to happen is they're going to meet in the middle somewhere. Whether it's more towards the workers or more towards the regime. I think like the end result is they're going to meet in the middle. Eventually it'll lose steam, and there will be some concessions made, whether it's a lot or a little, I don't know at this point. And I feel like John Ryman and the IMT, like, let's be honest, they both represent like the Trotskyist trend, which is kind of its own, niche within the Marxist community. And, and I'm not knocking them for being Trotskyist and, just for being Trotskyist, but I don't think that they're asking the right questions here. Like, I know John Ryman's article, I think it's actually written by someone, I don't know if it's written, it's written by Anthony Boynton. But regardless, who writes it, it's like, I don't feel like the right questions are being asked. It's like the questions for me is, well, like, how should people within the Marxist community, how should revolutionary activists approach this movement? Like, what should they be doing, right? Like, what should we be doing? Because there's a movement regardless. The movement is eventually probably going to meet in the middle somewhere. They're going to compromise, and then things are going to settle, basically, right? Between two different forces. And it's like, well, what can we do, in my opinion, to raise the consciousness of the working class so that way we can have a step forward? And what should our goals be, and then how to move forward toward those goals? I don't feel like the IMT or Oakland Socialist raises that question very well.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and important, an obvious important step, because because it's all it's going to do. Otherwise, it's just going to leak back and forth between these parties that are really accomplishing not much. We just need to get into a position where we can ask these right questions, and then we can lay out a, a proper way forward for for each country in this the state that they're in, because obviously different countries are at different stages of capitalism.
Yeah, and just one more thing. I know the IMT at the end, they usually have their bullet points, and this is no different. And I'm glad that they call for removing the Duque or Uribe government, and as well as the ruling class. I mean, I think that's good. But the slogan, "The strike doesn't stop." I mean, I can understand the Trotskyists jumping on that because of like their ideas of permanent revolution.
Yeah.
But the problem with that slogan is the strike is going to stop.
Yeah.
Like, let's just be real here. Like, let's just take a real, like a realistic approach to this. Yeah, the strike is eventually going to stop, and then what? And it's good that they say no to austerity. And yeah, we shouldn't like want austerity. But the question is like, well, how are we best going to fight against that? And I'm glad they call for a workers' party, but then they don't say anything in regards to, well, how is a workers' party going to be built? Right?
Yeah.
Like, who's going to build the workers' party? How's it going to be built? Like, who's, like who's going to build it? And if it's like Colombian revolutionary activists, I don't know if this is the case, but like, let's just assume that they're like the rest of the world and they don't want to talk to each other and they want to ban each other from every little group and keep themselves from talking to each other. How are they ever going to build anything if they don't talk to each other and they're not willing to work out differences and debate each other and talk like comrades? How will they ever do anything? They will never do anything. So like that's out the window if you don't address that. It's just hot air. And so anyway, that's all I gotta say on that.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to Israel and Gaza and the Palestinian
You've
struggle.
been following probably the Gaza thing better than I have lately, right?
Well, I wouldn't say lately.
Yeah.
I've written a couple of long papers on it for school and stuff, but yeah, recently, I did want to make some comments on this reporting, but I also, once we get into it, I went to, because I was questioning, I got to be honest, the IMT is all over the place with this. And
Sure.
for comrades who don't, if I didn't know the history and the situation so well, I'd be like, they're all over the place. I don't know what they're talking about.
It's very difficult to follow it based on their articles, in my opinion.
Yeah, me too. I'm like, but I know the history and stuff, and I want to confirm a couple of things, what exactly, because they say a couple conflicting things, and then they mention Hamas, and then I want to say, well, what was the statement made by Hamas? And I went to the website, and predictably, it's down, so I'm sure Israel is censoring it or whatever.
Let's just summarize how IMT sees the latest situations of the last.
Yeah. Well, I was getting to that because they say in one of their articles the reason why they started launching the missiles was specifically because Israel was occupying a holy site. What?
It was the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Yeah, the mosque. But it also, it goes deep. Obviously, goes deeper than that. There's all the home evictions surrounding that too. So I just wanted to. The reason why I went into that intro is I want to know, did they also mention that? Because it seems more of a political statement, a religious statement, if you're just relying on that and not.
You haven't read Have you read the Hamas statement?
What's that?
Have you read the Hamas statement from
haven't.
Hamas?
I was trying to look for it.
I haven't either.
You have it?
No, I have not. So I haven't read like their latest statement on this, like, but I know that like let's just talk about the IMT's take real quick. They're saying,
Yeah.
because we're kind of learning, I think we're kind of both at the same state on what we know about the latest situation, right? Like, I mean, both of us has followed this Israel Palestine for a long time, but even if you follow this for a long time, it doesn't mean, I mean, unless you're following it every day, it's very, you can get lost very quickly, right? So so what IMT is saying, and this is as I understand it, is they're saying that Israeli settlers were basically given a green light by the Israeli president to continue pushing against the Palestinians and, take land and homes and stuff, and including evictions. And what happened was there was a nonviolent protest pushback against that. And afterwards, a far-right Israeli party mobilized people to basically push down towards the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And this resulted in a police occupation of Al-Aqsa Mosque. And, I could be wrong about this. This is just what I'm understanding from IMT's perspective. And so tear gas and rubber bullets were shot in the mosque. Like I said, I could be wrong about this, but this is as I understand it. And after that occupation, they were given a deadline to get out of the mosque by Hamas. And when they did not meet that deadline, Hamas decided to start shooting rockets at Israel.
Yeah. And also, I don't know if they mentioned in this IMT article, there were the far right, Israeli, groups were, screaming death to all Arabs and stuff like that, and beaten up. There was, this is I don't know what it's like in the press there, but this is in the Canadian mainstream press where they actually mistook Israeli as a Palestinian. And so they beat the crap out of him too. So it's a lot more than just what, some news outlets are saying, oh, Hamas just because of this, they were occupying this mosque. It's a lot more than that, and a lot more than what's being said in some media circumstances. Anyways, so which is the first one? I had a question here. So my question here. So now that you've kind of summarized the situation, they say, IMT is like, we can't. There will be no solution unless we end capitalism also. So do you think, you think a country can have self-determination first, or is there no chance of that? Because I understood as our position for a long time, and a lot of other conflicts. What do you think of them automatically linking, saying, oh, there's not going to be any peace till there's a socialist government in Israel?
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
And that this two-state solution is
I'm not. Well, first, what is a socialist government? Because right, like that's something I think that a lot of people within the Marxist community like do not have a consensus on, like what makes what government a socialist government. Like I don't think it's like they say, like it's like, I know I've heard a lot of like people within the community say that, like, oh well, like it's just the normies that are confused on that issue. No, I think that a lot of people within the Marxist community are confused on that issue. And we'll probably talk more about that later, but the thing is, and this is kind of the position I've had since about 2014, like a public position I've had. I came up with this I didn't come up with it on my own. I mean, I came up with it with Ben Seattle. We talked about it a lot. We talked about all the different groups' perspectives on Israel, and basically, we concluded apartheid needs to end in Israel. So there is an apartheid system in Israel. The Palestinians need basic civil rights, need to be citizens, and they need to have basic civil rights. The Israeli state basically has to end. It has to, like, this as we know it, you know, like.
Yeah.
And the reason I say
that brings me to a quick point in this confusing article. It says the Israeli state is powerful, but there are clear indications that a crisis is brewing. I don't agree with that really at all. I
don't think so either.
I think they're quite. A different article that we'll talk about says that they're pretty united in this, and I agree. I mean, I don't think there is not a crisis at all in Israel.
In my opinion, as long as the United States and Europe think it's fine to send aid to Israel, there's no crisis.
Yeah.
Because they're gonna basically, Israel's like an outpost in the middle of the desert, right?
Yeah.
And they have a finite amount of like resources in Israel. They have to import a lot of stuff. It's a desert, it's in the desert. It's like, I mean, yeah, it's kind of Mediterranean, but like they don't have all the resources that say the United States has or Europe has, and they need trading partners. And so until that tap gets turned off, there's no crisis. Until there's a shortage of goods and money, there's no crisis. Because, like, are the Palestinians going to provide a crisis? I don't think so. Not anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, that would be like, oh, the United States is going to have a crisis because it has a prison riot.
Right. So my question too, because now there's a couple things that are kind of like conflicting in this article. It says it talks about rockets being counterproductive for Palestinian struggle, and in a sense I agree with it. But down below it says the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves. So first of all, so what's your view on rockets, and what's your view on what exactly is self-defense look like in this case?
Okay, as far as my view on the rockets is, like, I have a couple different thoughts on the rockets. For one, I think it's important to understand the rockets are not very effective. They're like very crude. They're basically like less effective than rockets from World War II.
Yeah.
Like, as far as like lethality, they're basically oversized bottle rockets.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even think they produced any casualties in this latest little battle.
I think they reported 2.
Okay, so 2 casualties after like several hundred rockets are fired.
Yeah. So do you, I guess maybe before you're leading to that, do you think this is more propaganda use for Hamas than anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think this is more propaganda use for Hamas. I think there's, like, right now they control the Gaza Strip. They've done so for a while, and they do need something to basically legitimize themselves, right? Yeah. Like to stay in power. So like if they don't do anything, right? When Israel's bullying Palestinians, and then like what's the point? Because they don't. It's not like they give Palestinians a lot of democratic rights or anything in their own territory. You know, it's not like they're a very effective government. So like Hamas, I think, in my opinion, is tolerated in Gaza because it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's a pit bull, but it's our pit bull, right? And if Hamas stops being a fucking guard dog for Palestinians, then it's totally worthless. and that's kind of how it's seen, in my opinion. But
I agree because it's, there's this misconception that it's like the, it's the Arabs that want to push Israel into the sea, but it's been proven time and time again, Israel's not going to stop until they are, they want them gone from the area.
Every person from Israel that I've talked to on this issue basically says they want the Palestinians to leave Israel.
Yeah, and I mean,
like it's no different from
that's why
Nazi Germany.
Hamas got overwhelming,
right.
support when they were voted in, because nothing else.
Right.
Nothing else. They don't see any other kind of any other option, and so I understand.
Well, they don't. Yeah.
I mean,
but going back to the rockets, going back to the rockets, even though I think that they're ineffective, I don't think, ineffective without, in lethality. I also don't think that they're very effective politically. Like, I don't think that they're helping to end apartheid.
No,
that's the goal, in my opinion, is to end apartheid, and actually it's to end it, I think Israel does not have a right to exist. I'll say it. I know a lot of people are afraid to say that. I don't think that they have a right to exist. Okay, an apartheid state does not have the right to exist, in my opinion, not in this planet. I don't care if it's South Africa. I don't care if it's Israel. I don't care if the United States
I've
were
argued
apartheid.
on this. It was built that way, and it was built on
Nazi Germany doesn't have a right to exist. Fascist Italy doesn't. I don't think any fascist state has a right to exist. Any apartheid state has a right to exist in this whole world. So, I can't see a world. I don't believe in a world with those kinds of states, and at all. And anyway, so I don't think the rockets are very effective politically. I think they're actually harmful. I think the nonviolent movement should have been supported more by Hamas. I'm not sure if it's, I think it has been supporting it, but on the one hand, but it's like, is it really though?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough question to answer for because we both know this history well, and how much has this, nonviolence, how much is of a nonviolent movement gonna help without outside support? Now,
I think Palestinians do have a right to defend themselves, but for one, I don't see that launching rockets is really defending themselves, and then for two,
sure.
I agree that the Palestinians should be armed, but the other thing is, we have to be realistic here. When I say they have the right to defend themselves, I mean, both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, from everything I've seen for the last 20 years, indicates that they're ghettos. And so, right.
They
and so,
absolutely are.
So these are basically Palestinian ghettos, and the way I see defending themselves is no different from the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. They have a right to arms, and any incursion, they have the right to shoot any IDF soldier that goes into those ghettos, to murder their people. But it's but we also have to think well, are the rockets really defend? Is the world gonna see that they're defending themselves by launching rockets?
Yeah.
I know the rockets do nothing. I'm not saying the rockets do anything. But they killed 2 people. That's, for how many rockets they've fired, they've basically done nothing. I mean,
I think the situation is, well, I think the perceptions are changing though, from a few a few a decade ago from now.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more people that are more into not that have come to understand a little bit better that it's not just Hamas as
I think part of it is social media.
Yeah.
It's just really easy to like, social media just makes it really easy to Instagram all this stuff. But yeah.
Anyway,
talking
anything.
Talking back about the IMT on this, and not just the IMT, but other groups. Like, and let me see if I know the IMT usually summarizes everything in bullet points at the end. Here we go. Like the IMT cheat sheet, even stuff that they don't even mention in the article. Like, okay, so they say like mobilize international working class solidarity to stop the bombing, support Palestinian resistance. They don't mention, okay, when they say mobilize working class solidarity, they don't mention BDS once, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement.
Yeah.
And BDS, in my opinion, is the most effective solidarity campaign in the last 20 years. Easy.
Yeah, and especially if you're going to talk about we can only achieve this with the end of capitalism. I mean, that's a direct tactic of fighting against, this capitalist or fascist Israel state.
Right. And then the other thing is, it's like, they say for the right of both Palestinians and Jews to a homeland within a socialist federation, like of the Middle East, like, yeah, that sounds great, but you're dreaming.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about coexistence first.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, coexistence, and I mean, it's hard enough for people in our country.
Let's get Israelis to see Palestinians as human beings first.
Yeah.
Then we'll talk about a socialist federation in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But like one step at a time here, buddies. Like, it sounds great, but like this is like so up in the clouds compared to like reality of what's going on right now.
Yeah.
I mean, like I know, like with Ben Seattle in 2014, and I put it on the Reddit page below. Like I put together a pamphlet on something very similar. It was when Gaza was being bombed in 2013, and like I said, like Israel doesn't have a right to exist. Like the state of Israel has to be abolished. It has to go away as we know it, and a new state is probably going to have to get created. Now, is it going to be like a socialist federation? Probably not. But it would be a step forward. It'd be a huge step forward. And the other thing is, but Israel has to go basically as we know it, a Jews only state. There has to be a state with coexistence, with no racism, no part. Well, there's going to be racism, but there can't be apartheid, and everybody has to have democratic rights and citizenship and the right to vote and representation in government, and I understand that's like not, a socialist revolution, but like one step at a time here.
Yeah.
And I think that'd be a tremendous step forward. I think it's actually realistic. The question is like, well, how are you going to get there? And I think to get there, the United States and Europe, they have to cut off all aid, and they don't want to do that. The United States alone sends billions of dollars in aid to Israel, and every single politician pledges military support to Israel pretty much under any circumstance. And the only way to stop that, in my opinion, is to put pressure in those countries, in European countries and in the United States. And I think doesn't Canada also like provide a bunch of support to Israel?
They
I
sell,
mean, way less than the United States. I mean, don't get me wrong, but
just this week, the leader of Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, put forward kind of a, you know, a proposal to stop selling weapons and
okay,
to Israel, and also to they don't give aid, but they sell them, you know,
right,
military like grade
weaponry.
machinery and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, and you know, even the liberals, they're a little more vocal than like our past Stephen Harper and stuff. So, you know, there's the perception here is a little bit different than in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. has a huge Israeli lobby on,
Sure.
you know, on top of everything else. But yeah, but that is the situation right now. There was a article on my page. Maybe I'll post it on. It describes like Canada and like what the opposition parties and the current ruling party have said about what's happening now.
Right, but
post it in the chat.
In my opinion, the only thing that's going to stop the aid to Israel is going to be a mass movement in the United States and Europe. It's going to require strikes and the workers that work at the ports refusing to load up arms into ships, you know, things like that. And so if there's no movement, and then to build something like that, there has to be a movement in the United States and Europe, right? Like there has to be, like in my opinion, a workers' movement, and
Yeah.
And if there's no movement, that doesn't happen, basically.
Yeah.
And so the whole world should be working to support that kind of movement. Like, I don't think, you know, I'm skeptical that like Americans alone could build that movement without international support, you know, without international pressure on Americans.
Well, yeah, I mean, even a lot of the Arab countries, especially the wealthy ones, do fuck all around the region. You know, even for like the Syrian refugees. I mean, you know, some of those are, you know, they've got huge amounts of money from oil and stuff. I mean, they could have done a lot for these refugees, but yeah, I mean, it's not just the West. There's a lot of shitty.
It would take a lot of international pressure on Israel, I think, for them to stop. You know, for them to fall apart, basically, to have a real crisis. I think a crisis is the key for doing this, but the question is like, well, what's going to cause the crisis? Like in South Africa, like we have to think like, well, what caused the crisis in South Africa? You know, like, you know, when it ended apartheid, it didn't end the apartheid because South Africans were telling them to end apartheid. You know, like, you know, like black South Africans. They didn't give a shit about what black South Africans wanted.
Yeah.
You know, and they were a nuclear power too. They had a military, you know.
Yeah.
There was a huge amount of international pressure that pushed them, basically, you know, that basically ended apartheid and that made it fall apart. And I think the same thing is going to have to happen with Israel. It's going to take a huge amount of international pressure, including where it's getting its main funding from. If it loses funding from the United States and Europe, I suspect that Israel would look immediately to Russia and China. And so it's not like, it's not like it's the United States and Israel are the only places it could probably get money from, and it's already talked to Putin, right? Like to Russia, and it's like, because Israel will need outside funding, and this is why I think it's like completely ridiculous to suggest that there only needs to be workers' movements in the United States and Europe, but Russia and China doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, for instances like this. But anyway. Let's move on, huh?
Yeah. Okay. Are we done with the IMT articles on this, or?
Yeah, I mean, do you have anything else on these?
No, I mentioned it earlier about there being a crisis, but you know, this last one IMT article that was a statement from this Samudun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network.
Okay.
Yeah, they kind of said, well, there is no crisis. They're pretty much united. And then I think there was a question down here that I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
So it says in the next period. So look, that's the way that's the where it starts in the next period. Okay, so it says in the future, such developments will take place again. Like it says in 2012, 2013, hundreds of thousands of Israelis took to the street carrying signs such as "Fight like an Egyptian." In the future, such developments will take place again on an even higher level. This Palestinian movement could use this as a lever with which to divide Israeli society along class lines, thus weakening the power of the Israeli state apparatus. This would be a precondition for bringing to an end Israeli imperialism together. So, do you think, because you said, we need the Israelis need to see the Palestinians as people, and there are a lot that do, but there are a majority that don't. Do you think this is the way in? Is through like the poor pockets of Israeli society, or do you needs to go even further than that?
I think it needs to go further than that. That's why I said I think it's going to require real international pressure. I think it's going to require the United States stopping sending aid to Israel. It's going to real international pressure that's going to weaken the capitalist class in Israel.
Yeah,
because it's the capitalist class in Israel is not just powerful because of its own domestic exploited classes. It's powerful because the international capitalist class in the richest countries in the world are sending money and aid to it, and they have their backs.
Control the narrative too,
right?
Which is exactly why they don't. They're able to, distort views on Palestinians and make them all out, to be terrorists or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. So on to the next section. Where are we at now?
So let's talk about the DSA.
All right.
So yeah. So the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, they put out a statement on what's going on in Palestine and Israel, and their statement, in my opinion, it sounds stronger than what's being put out by the IMT. Doesn't that sound silly? But it basically not only calls for the end of evictions and settlements and apartheid, but it also calls to support BDS. I didn't really see anything too controversial with this, as far as controversial with me. I didn't have any strong opinions against this or anything. I do kind of question AOC's position. So AOC is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who I think is a DSA member.
Yeah.
Which, I understandably it doesn't that shouldn't be addressed in that statement. But this DSA statement was put out by a DSA member on Our Socialism, and someone was like, hey, what about what AOC's been saying and other DSA backed legislators? I don't know who those DSA backed legislators are that Bo Shot is referring to. But I am aware that AOC has been kind of soft pedaling on Israel lately, and Electronic Intifada did an article which I mentioned on the Reddit, and the response to that by this particular DSA member named Lilio is that DSA members officially endorsed BDS 3 years ago in 4 years ago in 2017, and AOC called Israel an apartheid state. This is kind of a long time ago. But she isn't perfect on this, and she should be supporting BDS, but people have this weird obsession with focusing on politicians, and that DSA has no control over AOC or the politicians they endorse, and that basically they're their own individuals, they can do whatever they want. And then it says
I'll just post, I mean, this is her latest post on Instagram and social media. So I mean, she is in this last post, you know, condemning Israel, but I don't know what's being said as far, but like you said, I mean, it shouldn't be just about the one individual or whatever, but that's what she said lately.
I think that DSA members have an obligation to keep the candidates that they endorse and push into elections in check. You know, and the idea that they're their own people and, you know, they say whatever they want, we have no control over them. Hey, it's like, if I'm in a football team, right?
Yeah.
If I'm in a football team and well, I'll say American football team because I don't understand soccer very well, but let's say everybody has a position on an American football team, and the quarterback keeps throwing interceptions to the other team, right? And keeps calling bad plays, right?
Yeah.
Who's on our team? So, like, let's say we're Seattle, so Seattle Seahawks. And Russell Wilson keeps throwing interceptions to the other team, right? And Russell Wilson's a great player, but he keeps throwing interceptions to the other team. Now, at some point, we're going to have to address Russell Wilson's chronic throwing of interceptions to the other team and say, hey, you need to stop throwing interceptions or we're going to have to trade you.
Yeah.
You know?
So what are you suggesting, that AOC needs to be traded to the Republicans?
Well, yeah, it's like the DSA needs to say, hey, stop throwing interceptions or like we're kicking you out, basically.
Yeah.
You know, or we'll, because like if you don't, you're not a part of the DSA. We don't want to be associated with that. You know, and they're not doing that, and it's like, and so I think there is a basic obligation to hold team members accountable. When you're in a political party, you're a team member, whether. You know, and we were talking earlier about how people in the Marxist community, like, they need to work as a team, but it doesn't mean they don't need to hold each other accountable. They still need to hold each other accountable, in my opinion. Right? I mean, I think that's kind of basic. So, but I mean, if AOC did say what you said, like about in her latest tweet, that is good.
Yeah.
But I mean, I also understand that she's like that Electronic Intifada is at least concerned that she's been soft pedaling on things. And basically shifting to the right. Well,
I would like, I'd like to see, I would like to, I haven't read that article, but I will, and I would like to see more of that because I understand the politics of having to, having to deal with certain, the Jewish lobby or
Sure.
the Israeli lobby in Washington. So, but I haven't heard her all out support yet. But I mean, I'll read that article later and stuff. But you're right. The latest statement is good, but you're
Well,
right.
another person
There needs to be...
that was soft pedaling, in my opinion, was Jeremy Corbyn, who was trying to play both sides.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn was strongly in supportive of the Palestinian struggle, and then he got called anti-Semitic for that. And then Jeremy Corbyn's response was basically to speak out against anti-Semitism and to legitimize these people calling him anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And so there is an issue of legitimizing your opposition.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, absolutely. Okay.
The last thing we should probably talk about is Bowl EA. And so this is the Korean Bolshevik tendency splinter group, Bowl EA. And their statement on Hong Kong and China, it's kind of long. And
it is long, and it's kind of surprised me, but I kind of liked most of what this article had to say.
It's interesting. For someone that wants to see citations and evidence, you're giving them like a lot of slack here, in my opinion.
Who?
You.
Me?
Yeah. Because there's nothing here.
Yeah. Well,
it's very poorly evidenced, like sourced.
Well, okay, yeah. I mean,
and the other thing is, for how much they assume.
Yeah.
I think it's very poorly sourced. I think that their
right,
thoughts
you got me there, but some of the, a lot of the stuff that they were talking about, I knew. So, but you're right, it should be sourced. Like a lot of the stuff, that they were making points on this. So yeah, they do. Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about like Hong Kong's GDP. Like not only is that not sourced, but like there's like all these thoughts on like, well, the Chinese capitalist class wants this and the Hong Kong capitalist class wants that. And none of that's sourced. There's no evidence of that. Not in this article. I mean, it's an interesting thought. I think that their thoughts are interesting. But just because they say that doesn't make it true.
Sure. But, it's the same thing with all of these articles too.
Absolutely.
That's what I've been saying, because some of a lot of the other, that have our sides of view have the, isn't sourced very well either. There are a couple sources in here, but
like the John Ryman and the, regarding like say like the Colombian articles, those weren't making assumptions on the capitalist class in Colombia very much.
Yeah.
They didn't even address the capitalist class. Let's be honest. I mean, and the IMT's thoughts on the Israeli capitalist class and what they're gonna do, like there's nothing there either. Like let's, I have the same criticism of that, and which is why I thought it was bogus, and so, but this makes a lot of assumptions that I think are very poorly sourced.
Which assumption do you have a problem with? Because this isn't. I've had problems with
one of those assumptions is
there are a few sources and links in here. That's not totally.
One of those assumptions is that the Hong Kong capitalist class wants China to go fully capitalist or and doesn't want it to continue to basically continue to, doesn't want it to nationalize Hong Kong, and that this is a big phobia of the Hong Kong capitalist class. And like there's this assumption that China is a degenerated worker state, which is it's a very Trotskyist description of China. But then they can't explain how it's a worker state.
They said a degenerated worker state?
Yeah.
Well, it
Are you saying it was a worker? It was.
I think that might
was
be.
it ever a worker state?
Maybe that's a problem with this a language problem.
China was never a worker state. That's not a language problem. That's a Trotskyist problem.
It is degenerated, but I guess would you ever have called it a worker state at one point?
No.
It never was a worker state.
No.
So, all right. So, nothing was. When there was a communist revolution, it was.
Yeah. No.
No. All right. So.
Did the workers control China ever?
Yeah.
That's what a worker state is to me.
It's not saying it is a worker state. It's saying it's degenerated.
Right.
For state.
But
so
the
all
workers
I'm saying
never
is I
even
think that
controlled
might be
it. So how could it degenerate?
A translation problem or something like that. I don't think it's. I mean, it's definitely degenerated.
Well, yeah, it's degenerated, but is it a degenerated worker state?
Well, I guess I could say the same. I mean, I guess I'm thinking like when people say, "Oh, it's a degenerate." I guess so. Like saying something like a degenerate
doesn't a workers' state imply a state that's controlled by the working class, a dictatorship of the proletariat?
Yeah, so then why was all right, so you don't think so why did Ben Seattle support them at one point then?
Support China?
Yeah.
Because he was a Maoist.
So he was, but he
didn't. I mean, I'm sure Ben might watch this later if he's not already watching. But Ben was a Maoist. Like he is the same reason he supported Stalin. He supported Stalin and Mao. Like his group, which I think he accurately describes as kind of a cult. Which was the MLP. They supported Stalin and Mao, and I don't think they used the term degenerate worker state because that was more of a Trotskyist term. That was something that Trotsky coined, I think. But yeah, no, they considered them to be for a time workers' revolutions, and then they began to develop criticisms of those. Of that perspective, after Enver Hoxha started Albania started making criticisms of them, and then later I think they developed criticisms of Enver Hoxha, and so, but yeah, like that. Just because their little group says that it was a workers' state at one point, if they did. I can't verify that. It wouldn't make it a worker state.
Okay, well, let's move on. Degenerated worker state. I don't think that is that big of,
I think it is.
They obviously have a problem with.
I actually take a big issue with that.
Well, okay, so 80%. All right, so do you? Right, so it says, 80%. China is still a country where state ownership is central, with 80% of the top 20 companies still state-owned, and state-owned enterprises accounting for 82% of the GDP, according to the Korean Energy Economic Institute 2015 report. So, do you have a problem with all of these, what they're saying about, like, all of the 5 causes behind the protests? Or is there something specific?
Yeah, I think... The big issue I have with they don't cite any like what Hong Kongers are saying about this, which is kind of an issue I have. They're writing from South Korea. And the other thing is like these are massive protests with like 2 million people, right? Like we covered this. And
I know. I don't like, but I think that's, I mean, I don't know about that where they cite people like, I mean, this is a background, article, and I think, those other
well, it's not just
a
background.
A lot of places aren't, a lot of articles we cover. I agree that we need, there could be more, not every article is going to have interview, like Hong Kong people on the ground, right? But all I'm asking, is do you think, we don't have to hear from every single Hong Konger, but do you think the 5 main reasons that they outline, most of it's true?
I don't. I don't think they correlate to the demands of the protest. Do you remember the demands of the protest?
Well, I mean, I agree. Yeah, well, so I understood, like, I know, like, this extradition bill, like, I mean, what they say is true about it is, like, about what happened in Taipei and stuff. So you don't think there's an intense distrust on the Hong Kong authorities and the Chinese government's judicial process? You don't agree with that?
There is, but like, let's look at the demands real quick. Here's the demands right here.
Okay.
This is the demands I had to read like almost in every post that from Hong Kongers. So the first one, complete withdrawal of the extradition bill. So that has to do with distrust that if you're going to that if you get extradited to China, they're going to torture your ass and disappear you if you're a dissident, right? Which they don't really mention in that article. That's why the distrust is there. 2, establish independent commission to the police brutality and misconduct. So the police are brutalizing the protesters and they wanting to see the police accountable, right?
So hold on. I mean, I'm not favoring, like, I'm not in favor of the Chinese state, but I mean, you're saying that everybody gets arrested is going to be tortured and disappeared in China.
Well, that's the fear. Because that happens.
I mean, I think it's a little more, I think that's over.
It happens to labor activists all the time. That's why there's no trade unions in China.
Yeah, but I mean, so why isn't that talked about? I think, I mean, a whole article could go on that. All I was asking for is the basic outlines.
Yeah, and this is it.
Is it right? Is it right? And you basically said, yeah, well, that's true, but then a whole article could be written on what you just said.
Well, it's got some truth to it.
Unfair. I was just asking that. So let's move on to the second. I agree with what you're saying. But second, it says, because the horrendous life of Hong Kong's working.
That article doesn't mention these demands at all.
What's that?
The article by Bo EA in South Korea does not mention these demands at all. Not once.
Okay, so
but this is on everything that they post in Hong Kong. These demands are like everything.
Where? On every article, it posts this, the 5 demands.
Pretty much.
I haven't seen these on a lot of the articles that we've talked about.
No, but like in the Hong Kong protests themselves.
Sure.
Right? By the protesters themselves. What we cover is mainly what the Marxist community is talking about. And a couple did mention this. But like this one's trying to say, basically reinvent what they were mad about in Hong Kong. And that's like what Ball EA is trying to do is they're trying to basically spin what they were mad about. But this is actually what they were mad about in Hong Kong. Like,
Well, yeah, but it's giving background to like complete withdrawal of the extradition bill, right? So I mean, you know, I mean, if these are the 5 known demands, I mean, then you're thinking about it's giving some background and reasoning to that, right? And it says genuine
the
universal
extradition bill was
suffrage.
just one part of it. A
What's
lot
that?
of this, like the police brutality and the charges of the protesters, like that's different. That's with how the response to the protests themselves. The 612 riot claim was basically when they said that everybody that was protesting was a rioter, so they could charge them with felony charges, just like how they do in the United States. How they're trying to do in the United States and like the southern states.
Yeah, I mean, demands are,
then,
you know, at the time, but I mean, there's some,
in general, universal suffrage is kind of a big one because that means, like, hey, we don't have the right to vote on our own policies. Isn't that kind of a big deal? I think it is. When all your leadership.
This isn't talking. This is talk. Says our position on the protest against the Transmittal Act in there, and there's some background in here that's important information to know, not just about these. All right, it should be tied. You know, there should be more tying into this, but all I asked is if 5 of these were, generally speaking, they were correct, and there are, but you're right. So I'll give you that. It needs to be tied into these 5 demands.
Like, they don't mention suffrage, the fact that Hong Kongers don't have the right to vote at all in this article.
Right.
It's kind of a big deal.
It is a big deal, but I mean, this is about the, this is giving background, and I just asked for that. I mean, I think you're being too hard on this article.
I don't think so.
Well, I mean, we've covered a lot of background, especially from bloggers.
But this article isn't just talking about
this kind of background.
This article isn't just saying background. This is a political article, right? It's not just giving you a history lesson.
I didn't say it was.
Right. It's not just background. It's also basically saying this is the reason why they're protesting and why the protests are illegitimate. It's to delegitimize the protests. That's their argument here. Like, and that's why they're providing this specific take on background in Hong Kong. This group, Bull EA, their position is that is basically that the Hong Kong protests were basically working for U.S. and European imperialists, and that China had every right to crush those protests.
I don't think this is. I don't think this is like a lot of like the pro-tankies articles at all. I mean, it's criticizing the Chinese state.
Sure.
In here too.
Yeah, but like let's.
Anyways,
they do not see China as an imperialist country. They see it as they see it as a degenerated workers' state that must be defended. So it's actually very similar to the tankies. That's why that in itself is very important to hone in on. They consider it a workers' state that has some problems that can be fixed, and therefore it needs to be defended, and we need to side with the workers' state and not with these imperialist protesters.
I don't get that. It says China's state-owned system is now very dangerous. I don't think that says there's a few little problems here.
The anti-labor character and the leadership of the...
I can see some of the problems you have with this article, but I don't think it's saying, oh, there's a few problems we could fix. I mean,
it calls the leadership of the Hong Kong protest anti-labor. Right?
What's
and then
that?
it basically... It talks on and on again about how the protests were anti-labor. They were anti-workers. They were anti, they were anti-working class.
You don't think that some of that, you don't think that was there? I mean, I've been to Hong Kong too, multiple times too, and I know.
I don't think the
I
protests.
I have to agree with that.
I don't think the protests were anti-labor.
What?
I don't think the protests were anti-labor at all.
I think there was a large group that was like that.
There's probably a large group, but I don't think that would characterize the entire.
There wasn't very much support from these.
I would not characterize the entire protest as anti-labor.
I wouldn't characterize the whole thing as anti-labor, but there were certainly forces behind that.
The Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions was behind it.
Behind the protest, the recent
they
protests
supported it. The Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions was supporting the protests.
Supported these protests.
Yeah, the second largest trade union federation in Hong Kong.
We also went through articles that said that there wasn't very much from that, and there is evidence too that there were a lot of pro-capitalists behind these. That's all I'm saying, and there was. I mean,
well, yeah, of course, but there were capitalists supporting the protests.
Very pro-capitalist.
But there were also capitalists against the protests.
Sure. But anyways, I think what we need I'm going to go over this and pull up some old articles that we've discussed. I'll rehash it with you.
Yeah, go for it.
It's getting late here, so let's I'll read this. Maybe we'll start.
We were talking about this, and you said I was wrong about this, and I'm just going to go. When you go to their demands at the bottom of the article,
yeah,
it says, second, let's defend the Chinese state ownership system from imperialist capitalist counter-revolution to bring the capitalist system back to entire China. So that's.
Sorry, what? Okay.
Let's defend the Chinese state ownership system from imperialist capitalist counter-revolution to bring the capitalist system back to the entire China.
See, that's what I was going to ask you about too, because that makes
let's defend
no sense.
China.
What?
It's a let's defend China statement.
Well, I don't think
it is. They're saying that China. They're saying that China has enough state-owned enterprises. It's a degenerated worker state.
Okay,
and it must be defended.
I'm going to give you that because I don't want to. This is getting late, and I don't want to keep. I will bring this up to you on Reddit because I didn't read it like that. But anyways, but then again, I woke up, groggy, and maybe I've just read a few things wrong here and skipped a bunch of places. But
yeah.
All right. Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, that about does it for the show.
Yeah, it was a good show. I'm awake now.
And thanks for watching, everybody. Please hit the bell, hit the subscribe, give us a like, and we'll try our best to make sure the sound's working and stuff. we need some reminders.
In the meantime, I'll
if you tune in live,
maybe I misread it.
Yeah, and
maybe Art is right on a couple points. Not going to give him the whole. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week, same time, same place.
Yeah, and as always, you can always check out the Reddit and post there. And Bolt EA posted to our Reddit. Obviously, I have serious disagreements with what they have written, like serious disagreements. And I've been, I'm not deleting what they wrote, and I'm not banning them for writing this. And I just want to show that there's, it's possible to have very serious disagreements within the Marxist community without, waving around the ban hammer and getting hyper emotional, where like we're not going to be talking to each other. Because that, in my opinion, that'd be much, much worse.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that they posted, and I hope they keep posting. Even though we have disagreements, I mean, I'm still going to voice my disagreements, of course. And
no.
I mean, I have a right to disagree,
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So I just wanted to put that out there, even though we have disagreements. I'm glad that they decided to post their thoughts, and hopefully we can, over time, we can iron out some of these differences. And if you have any thoughts on it, you're welcome to post onto the Reddit page and comment as well. Thanks for watching.